Today I read Batman Legends of the Dark Knight The Sleeping by Scott Hampton, parts 1, 2, and 3. I really enjoyed this story. It was trippy, it was intriguing, and it definitely was very different from anything I'd ever read before, which is what I'm always searching for in a superhero comic, I think. In general, I love Legends of the Dark Knight as a series. I think it is like this perfect vehicle for like these bite-sized Batman stories. I think it's great that they are based in this world and this character that we all know and love so much, but because it's like in these short bite-sized anecdotes, there's no pressure with like to consider continuity or like contributing to this greater world as much. And I think that that gives a lot of freedom for creativity and to focus more on the story rather than living up to like this big expectation of this character, which is why I think these stories are so well done, so thoughtful, and so interesting to me. I read a couple of them by now. So The Sleeping begins with the premise that Bruce Wayne gets into a car crash on his way home from a charity event, and he gets put into a coma. So the opening panels, this feels like a typical comic to me, you know? It's bright, it's colorful, there's fire, we have an inciting incident of some kind. But then, on our first page, once we're introduced to the world of The Sleeping, where the entirety of the story takes place, it looks very different. Everything is a lot darker, it's certainly not as colorful, there's shadows, we're in like this afterworld, underworld sort of situation. And I really liked that juxtaposition between like the real world and the land of the sleeping. Something I immediately noticed in this world is that it reminded me a lot of the premise of Dante's Inferno. We have like this man who wakes up in this shadowy, dark, dead forest afterworld, and this figure of authority, this guiding figure appears, Virgil, if you will. So this entity appears and basically explains the premise, like you're in a coma. If you want to get out of it, you have to travel through this scary dark land to get to this lake of fire and escape through it. And also, fun fact, because you have like such a good soul, you have an opposite soul, a twin soul, to like balance you out in this world. And if that twin soul dies in here, you also die. So there's like a little bit of world building. I thought it was the perfect amount of world building though. It wasn't so much where I'm like, okay, I need to like start taking notes because what's happening. But it was enough that I understood what was going on. And I think that if we're considering like accessibility barriers to comic stories, sometimes the sheer amount of world building can be hard if you're just a casual enjoyer or if you're new to like the character and the universe. So I really appreciated that amount of balance. So the mysterious figure, the Virgil type figure, disappears. And we have this really interesting panel on the bottom of the page here where he's staring at the floating mask and cape, which I think is very interesting. We just talked about the concept of a twin soul on the same page, actually. And now we have Bruce Wayne and the cape just looking at each other from opposite sides of the panel. To me, that feels very intentional as a piece of symbolism, like we're seeing like the human and the superhero part of him like literally facing down with each other. And I also think it's interesting how he dies in a tux, because he's not dead, he's in a coma, but that happens to him when he's in a tuxedo on his way back from a charity event. But when he wakes up in this world, he's in the Batman costume already. It's almost like that's his default mode or something. And I thought that was worth noting, because I think that says a lot about how he sees himself. So just to support my Dante's Inferno theory a little bit, we are literally like in a forest in the underworld, which is how the book starts. So I feel confident saying there was a little bit of inspiration there, at least a little bit. And we're also introduced to these like scary like harpy figures, like these like scary women who like try to eat the souls that are in here, and they serve like some greater overlord who's ruling the place, sort of like the devil. And there's a ton of like mythological references throughout this world, which I thought was super interesting. I love when a story sort of references like past cultural elements. I think it's just super interesting to add to the world. Batman meets Henry Sands, this other soul who's trapped in here, and they start traveling together through this world. I loved the use of like uniquely shaped panels in this. Just on this spread, first of all, we have this like big panel that takes up an entire page, even though it's not particularly exciting. They've just arrived at a doorway. doorways, Dante's Inferno, I'm onto something. But then over here on this other page, you have these like long panels stretching across the entirety of the page, which I don't see very often. And once again, it reminded me of trees. It felt very like liminal and suspended, like they feel trapped, but also everything is empty and airy. And I love how the art communicates with the story. I think that it is just perfectly balanced, and it's really cool. So at the end of the first issue, we meet his like twin soul, this woman. And they like rescue her and like, oh, this is my twin soul. And that brings us to part 2. So the cover art on all of these is also amazing. I'm such a fan of it. The woman we discover, the twin soul, her name is Mary, and she joins like their crew of survivors trying to get out of this place together. We also learned some interesting stuff about Henry. He's not a very good guy. I don't like him very much. He was bothering me the entire time I was reading this. I find him to be like very abrasive, very selfish and self-interested. And it makes sense that he doesn't have a twin soul, because the character in the beginning explains only people who exist in like towards moral extremities have that counterbalance. And he doesn't, because he's like a very average human in the sense that he's very imperfect. He talks about how he's been trapped here for a long time, and he had this other friend, and they got to the lake of fire where they're supposed to escape, and he basically was like, oh, ladies first, and then she dies. So, I didn't like him. I didn't trust him. I thought he was weird. I think that's the point. So, the three of them, Mary, Henry, and Bruce Wayne, have to essentially, like, travel through this, like, gross lake to try and escape. It's very much an Odyssey of sorts, to make a relevant reference. And they have to, like, travel through this body-filled lake, and it's very gross, and there's, like, a giant fish trying to eat them. Like Scylla. Actually, yeah, I definitely also inspired by the Odyssey. It's kind of hard not to be, I think. But also just visually stunning, interesting. Like, I never felt like the action was taking away from the story, or that the story was taking away from the action. I really thought that the story was perfectly balanced in every single way, which I think is really hard to do, and it made it just such an interesting read. I think anybody could pick this up and really enjoy it. And then they get to the Lake of Forgetfulness, which also, like, sort of reminded me of, like, the lakes in the Greek version of the underworld, which I thought was interesting. But when they cross it, they have visions. So Bruce has this vision of his parents. He meets them in a restaurant, and they say, like, we're so proud of you, son. We love you. It's very touching. It's very sweet. And then he gets breaking out of the trance. It's like, oh, it was only a dream. And then he has a second vision, which is particularly interesting, in which he and Mary were married and had, like, a family, kids together, everything. They had a whole life together. She explains, like, they met at Cambridge. They were both studying, like, Shakespeare, and they fell in love, and they had this great life, and he never became Batman. He was a famous novelist, and they had a great life together, and it's beautiful, and it's very touching. There's this whole idea of what might have been, because the place that they're in is very surreal. It's like this astral plane. It's very liminal. It's very separate from their concrete reality, and I think that a major part of it is just wondering about the possibilities of life and what could have been and what might have been. And there is a lot of, like, sadness in that, almost missing something that you never had. And at the end of the second installment, we discover that Mary was a part of the IRA. And maybe that's connected to how she got here, because they're all in comas, essentially. None of them are dead. It's hard to remember that sometimes because it feels like such an underworld situation, but they're not dead. And then we have the final part. Once again, brilliant cover art. And she explains, like, how she got involved in the IRA, and, like, how she came in it with the best intentions, and, like, she stopped when she realized, like, that they were going to murder this group of innocent people, and she wanted no part of it, and she felt super guilty. And what I thought was really interesting is this concept of the moral balance when it comes to twin souls that we were introduced to at the beginning of the first installment. I don't think that Bruce Wayne is all the way over here on the spectrum of goodness. I think he's just, like, a little bit here, you know? Because he does the right thing, but I think it does come from a place of darkness, because his whole arc as Batman stems from his childhood trauma of losing his parents. He is this shadowy figure. He covers his face. He's not like Superman. He doesn't really trust people, but he does the right thing anyway. Now we have an example of Mary, who's maybe over here, and she might be doing the wrong thing or doing bad things, but it comes from a good place. And I thought that they have a completely, like, inverse relationship to morality, which I thought was a much more interesting twin soul story than just like, oh, she's bad and he's good. And I really liked the complexity, because I feel like that's a trope that we see a lot, like twin souls and whatnot. And I thought that was super interesting. The rest of the story, they do successfully escape. They end up fighting like the soul eater, the devil, like figure. They have like this really touching moment at the end. I am speeding through this just because I think that the last one is the least interesting one, because it's just wrapping everything up. But Bruce and Mary have this heart-to-heart where he says, "Twin souls," he said, "drawn to opposite extremes. But maybe that connection, that link, pulls us back, keeps us from reaching them, and maybe we're both better for that." And I think that's beautiful. I think that's really beautiful. I think that's such a good take on the concept of like soulmates or whatnot. And they jump into the lake of fire together and they escape. And all three of them survive actually and wake up from their comas. I love this story. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. I would recommend it to anyone and everyone.